Get your black hands off my files and get the hell out of my building!
Supervisory Special Agent Derek Cross roared, his face contorted with pure rage. Before 41 stunned agents, he brutally snatched Morgan Price's credentials, ripped the lanyard off her neck, and slammed them face down into the trash can.
Look at you. A black girl from a soft compliance desk actually thought she could walk into my office and question my authority? Honey, people like you are nothing but diversity quotas hired to clean our desks, not sit at them. Morgan, you're out of line. Give me that badge! Get down now!
Cross, stop! Please, I need this.
I don't care.
No, wait!
As cruel, mocking laughter exploded across the room, Cross grinned, completely confident he had destroyed her dignity. He had absolutely no idea this woman had been awake since 4:30, dismantling his entire career from the dark shadows of the parking garage across the street. Morgan Price didn't scream. She didn't flinch. With a terrifying, icy stillness, she reached into her jacket and slammed a heavy, solid gold shield flat onto the table, shattering the glass coffee mug right next to it. The room went dead silent as 41 agents stopped breathing. The engraving in the gold read, "Special Agent in Charge, Morgan E. Price." She looked into Cross's pale, draining face and whispered, "Pack your bags, Derek. You're done." Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from. Hit that subscribe button immediately, because what this woman does over the next 8 days to dismantle this entire precinct will stay with you for a very long time. Let's back up to 48 hours before the storm hit. She had 14 years of decorated federal service, a record that made seasoned prosecutors lower their voices and defense attorneys quietly reconsider their career choices. Sadly, none of it meant a single thing to the man who was about to look at her across a briefing room table and decide in under 10 seconds that she was a problem he could solve. Supervisory Special Agent Derek Cross had been running the Denver FBI field office his way for 22 years. He had the case clearance rates to prove it, the commendations on his wall to frame it, and 41 agents who had learned, through various means and at various costs, to confirm it. He had no idea that the woman settling quietly into the second-to-last row of his morning briefing had already read every internal complaint ever filed against him, every transfer request from agents who had worked under him, and every performance review he had ever signed. He had no idea that she had been awake since 4:30. He had no idea that she had been sitting in a parking garage across the street for 23 minutes before she walked through his door, watching his people, reading his building before his building could read her. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching this from, and subscribe right now, because what this woman does over the next 8 days is something that will stay with you for a long time. The coffee in Morgan's travel mug had gone lukewarm 40 minutes ago. She did not drink it. She sat in the third row of the parking structure on the east side of Larimer Street with both hands wrapped around the cup and her eyes on the building across the road. The Denver FBI field office occupied floors 6 through 9 of a 12-story federal building, all glass and brushed concrete, the kind of architecture designed to project permanence. From where she sat, she could see the agents moving through the ground-level security checkpoint, some in suits, some in field jackets, most carrying coffee from the shop on the corner of Larimer and 18th. She had been watching them for 23 minutes, not because she was afraid. Morgan Elise Price had walked into rooms far more dangerous than any federal building in Denver. She had walked into a Chicago warehouse in 2016 with nothing but a wire and a cover story, and had walked back out 2 hours later with enough testimony to put 11 people in federal prison. Fear was not the thing keeping her in this parking garage. What kept her here was the specific, practiced stillness of a person who had learned the hard way that you never walk into a room you have not already read. Her phone buzzed. She already knew who it was. Still in the car? Assistant Director Harold James, 63 years old, 31 years in the bureau. He still texted like a man who had never fully trusted that the recipient had actually received the message. She typed back, "Getting a read on the building." His response came in under 10 seconds. "Morgan, You have every right to walk in there with your credentials showing. Just say the word." She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. Dark field jacket. Bureau issue lanyard with a standard agent badge. No SAC credentials visible. Her ID read: M. Price, Special Agent, Doge Review Team. Technically accurate. Strategically essential. She had chosen the plain lanyard the way other people chose a weapon. Carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of what she intended to use it for. She typed, "I need to see who they are before they know who I am." 3 dots appeared. Held for a moment. Then, "Be careful. Cross is not a stupid man." She put the phone in her pocket, picked up her bag, and got out of the car. The lobby of the Denver Federal Building smelled like recycled air and old badge plastic. She signed in at the security desk, showed her credentials without making anything of them, and took the elevator to the 6th floor. The Bureau's field office was a sprawling open floor plan with a glassed-in conference room at the far end and a row of supervisor offices running along the north wall. She could hear the morning briefing already underway before the elevator doors had finished opening. She walked in. The room held 41 agents. Most were seated at long, rectangular tables arranged in rows facing a projection screen. A handful stood along the back wall. At the podium, with one hand resting on the lectern and the other holding a clicker, stood Derek Cross, 52 years old. Built like a man who had once been very athletic and had allowed the years to settle into that frame without ever quite surrendering the posture it had built. Square jaw. Thick shoulders. The kind of easy authority that did not come from intelligence, but from 2 decades of nobody in this particular building ever telling him no. He moved at the front of the room the way men move when they have been given the same territory for so long they have stopped being able to imagine it belonging to anyone else. Morgan took a seat in the second-to-last row. The agent beside her clocked her as unfamiliar and looked away. She opened her notebook. She began to write. Cross was talking about clearance rates. His voice carried the room without strain. It was the voice of a man who had never doubted he would be listened to. She had been in the room 8 minutes when she raised her hand. He didn't see it at first. He was mid-slide, talking about budget allocation for the Organized Crime Division. When he did see it, his eyes moved over her with the slow, specific expression of a man encountering something in his space that he did not put there. He did not call on her. She kept her hand up. "Something you need?" His voice was still smooth. The room had not shifted yet. It was still the half-attentive ease of a Tuesday morning briefing, the clearance rate for white-collar cases. Her voice was level, unhurried, giving nothing. "Your slide shows 68%. The DOJ quarterly report shows 51. I'd like to understand the discrepancy." Several agents turned in their seats. Not all of them. Not yet. Cross looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his eyes, fast and controlled, like a door closing quickly in a wind. Then he smiled. The smile had a great deal of teeth in it, all of them kept politely out of sight. "Observers sit in the back," he said. Still pleasant. Instructional, almost. As though he were doing her a courtesy. "And observers do not interrupt an active briefing." "I'm not observing," she said. Same level, same unhurried tone. "I'm reviewing." There is a distinction. The room shifted. She felt it move through the space like a current. The specific molecular change in a group of people when they collectively understand that something interesting is about to happen and are trying to decide whether to be amused by it. Cross set his clicker on the lectern. He walked to the edge of the briefing table closest to her row, unhurried, the deliberate pace of a man who has never had reason to hurry toward anything because the ground has always been solid beneath his feet. He held out his hand. "Badge." She unclipped the lanyard and placed it in his hand. He read it. His eyes moved from the ID to her face and back. Once, slow. "Price." He held the badge loosely, almost carelessly, the way a man holds something whose weight means nothing to him. "DOJ review." He said it the way you say a word you have already decided means very little. He turned slightly toward the room, performing now, fully aware he had an audience, and that the audience was willing. "Let me explain something to you, Price. Since apparently nobody did you the courtesy of a proper briefing before they sent you here." He clasped his hands in front of him, the gesture of a man about to deliver important information to someone who needs it simplified. "This office runs real cases, not policy exercises, not compliance workshops. Real federal investigations with real stakes, real consequences, and real work being done by real agents who have been doing it for a very long time." He let the pause sit just long enough. "When a review team shows up from HR, we accommodate that. We're professionals. We understand the exercise." He tilted his head. "But when someone who has never worked a field case in her life raises her hand in the middle of an active briefing to challenge numbers, she found in a report she clearly does not have the context to interpret." He shook his head. "Slow, deliberate, theatrical? That is not reviewing. That is disrupting." He set her badge on the table in front of her, face up, placed with the particular precision of a man making a statement with an object. "Sit in the back, Price. When the grown-ups are done with the actual work, maybe we take your questions." The laughter came in waves. Some immediate. Some gathered from the edges of the room when other people decided it was safe to be amused. She heard all of it. She catalogued every voice, every face, every variation of grin or smirk or carefully neutral expression that was hiding a grin. She kept her own face completely still. Cross picked up his clicker. He turned back to the screen, and Morgan Price reached into the inner pocket of her field jacket and placed her credentials on the table in front of her. Not the DOJ lanyard, the other set. The credentials issued to her 3 weeks ago by the director's office in Washington, D.C. The gold SAC shield sat on the table in the full flat light of the briefing room. Special Agent in charge. Morgan E. Price. She did not stand up. She did not announce it. She did not raise her voice. She set it on the table where every person facing her direction could see it, and she looked at the back of Derek Cross's head, and she waited. The agent to her left saw it first. He went very still. Then the agent directly behind him. Then it rippled forward through the room like pressure moving through water, unstoppable, until it reached Cross. He felt the room change before he turned around. She could tell by the half-second pause in his slide presentation. The microscopic stillness of a man whose internal instrument panel has just registered an anomaly. Then he turned. He looked at the shield. He looked at her. His face did something in that moment that she knew, with absolute certainty, he would have prevented if he could have. All of it the smooth, calibrated authority, the performed competence, the 22-year certainty of a man who has never been surprised in his own room, drained out of his expression for exactly 2 seconds. And what was left underneath was smaller and harder, and considerably less certain than everything that had come before it. She picked up the shield. She held it up, steady, so the room could read the title clearly. "Thank you, Supervisory Special Agent Cross," she said. Her voice was exactly what it had been when she asked about the clearance rates, even, unhurried, giving nothing away. "Let's continue the briefing." The restroom on the 6th floor was single occupancy at the end of the east corridor. Morgan locked the door behind her. She stood in front of the mirror and breathed. One slow breath in, one long breath out. She had been here before, not in this bathroom, not in this building, but in this exact moment. The moment after the room has turned, after the air has changed, after 41 people who had been laughing 30 seconds ago are now sitting very still, and you are the thing that changed the room, and you are alone in a locked bathroom deciding who you are going to keep being. She had been in this moment more times than she could count. 14 years of being the first one, the only one, the one who walked into rooms that shifted when she entered. 14 years of case leads that migrated to someone else, of credit that evaporated between the moment she earned it and the moment it was assigned. 14 years of people who thought they were reading her without knowing she had read them 3 moves ago. She turned on the cold tap. She held both hands flat under the water and kept them there. Then she dried her hands, straightened her jacket, and looked at herself one final time. She unlocked the door and walked out. She had work to do. Patricia Vance had been the administrative coordinator of the Denver FBI field office for 19 years. She was 57 years old, compact and precise, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead and the kind of unhurried professional competence that belongs to people who have outlasted every problem the building has thrown at them. She knocked on Morgan's office door at 11:14 and entered carrying a folder, a legal pad, and 2 pens. Sack price. Her voice was professional. Her eyes said something else entirely. They said, "I have been waiting for this exact person for a very long time, Miss Vance." Morgan gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down." Patricia sat. She placed the folder at the edge of the desk with the careful, unhurried deliberateness of an offering prepared long before its recipient had been identified. Morgan opened it. Personnel files, internal complaint records, transfer requests going back 6 years, performance improvement plans cross-referenced against case outcomes, departure paperwork, annotated in small, precise handwriting. At the back, a hand-built timeline, color-coded, organized by year, every page dated and initialed. Morgan looked up from the pages. "How long have you been keeping these?" Patricia's expression did not change. "Since the 3rd time I watched it happen and nobody did anything about it." Morgan held her gaze. She looked back down. "Close the door on your way out," she said. And then, as Patricia rose, "Miss Vance." Patricia paused at the door. "Thank you," Morgan said. Patricia nodded once and was gone. The door clicked, quietly shut. Morgan sat alone in her inherited office, the wrong coffee smell, the wrong decisions still hanging in the air, and she turned to the first page. She began to read. The pattern took 2 uninterrupted hours to fully emerge on the morning of day 2. Morgan had been at her desk since 6. 6 agents. 5 years. The shape of it was almost elegant in the way that terrible things sometimes are when someone has spent years refining them. It worked with the systematic logic of a machine that had been tuned to near perfection. An agent challenged Cross, or filed a complaint against someone in his circle, or simply began asking the kind of questions that Cross had decided were inconvenient. Within weeks, a performance improvement plan materialized in their file, authored by Cross or one of his supervisors, citing performance concerns that could not be verified against any contemporaneous case record. The agent filed a grievance. Within 2 weeks, the Bureau's Employee Relations Unit received a countercomplaint from Cross's circle, citing conduct unbecoming, insubordination, or hostile communication. The union rep, a man named Frank Kell, appeared as representative in every single counter-complaint. The grievance died in internal adjudication. And then, within 60 days, a carefully vague story appeared in the Times, Denver Post-Times, or the Times, Colorado Tribune, citing anonymous sources suggesting that performance concerns had prompted a review of a specific agent's conduct. The agent transferred out, or resigned. The file got sanitized. The office moved on. She sat back in her chair and looked at the 6 names she had written in a column on her legal pad. Disproportionately women. Disproportionately black. Every single departure had cited hostile work environment as a contributing factor in the exit paperwork. Every single citation had been marked Times unverified, Times by the reviewing supervisor, a supervisor who, in every single case, was Derek Cross. She wrote a 7th name at the top of the column. She underlined it. Then she looked at Patricia's annotated timeline again. 19 years of documentation, built 1 page at a time by a woman sitting 17 feet from the machine's engine, watching it run, writing it all down in the dark on the chance that one day someone would come along who was worth handing it to. She called James. "It's systematic," she said when he answered. 6 agents in 5 years. Documentation going back to 2019 and likely further. A long pause. How solid. Solid enough to take to OPR. I need 48 more hours. A shorter pause. The pause of a man who trusted her judgment and hated waiting in equal measure. "48 hours," he said. "After that, I'm making calls regardless. That's all I need." She hung up. She opened the next file. Cross arrived at his desk by 8. She watched him move through the building with the careful, recalibrated energy of a man who had spent the previous evening deciding how to respond to the previous day's revelation. The easy territorial confidence of the morning briefing was replaced by something more controlled, more deliberate. Collegial greetings, held doors, attentive conversations in the hallway. He was building a record in real time, right in front of her. Every pleasant interaction on this floor was a future witness statement. Every collegial gesture was evidence of a man with nothing to hide. She watched him do it and showed nothing. Paul Benner, Cross's SSA, came to her office at 9 with a case briefing request. Professionally worded, formally submitted, nothing actionable, and everything calculated. She accepted it. She thanked him. She gave him nothing back. She was building her own record too. At 11:47, she formally requested security footage from Camera 7, the hallway camera outside Cross's office for the previous 18 months. At 2:15, the facilities manager responded. Camera 7 had been non-operational for approximately 7 months. Maintenance backlog. She requested the original maintenance documentation. She received 3 pages where there should have been a minimum of 8. The submission date was missing. The requester's signature was blank. The follow-up inspection record did not exist. She sent a second request for the original facility logs. She was told through Benner's assistant that the relevant log for that period was being located. She printed everything. She put it in a folder and labeled it. Then she opened the next file. She found Agent Camille Osei when she was not specifically looking for her. The young agent was in the records room at the end of the East Corridor, alone, working through a case archive that should have had 2 agents assigned to it. 29 years old, 3-year patch on her sleeve, she worked with the quiet, concentrated efficiency of someone who had learned that the best way to survive certain environments was to become invisible in them. Morgan watched her from the doorway for a moment. Then she knocked lightly on the frame. Camille looked up. Something complicated crossed her face. Not quite fear. The particular expression of a person who has been waiting for something for a long time and is not sure whether this is it. Agent Osei. Morgan kept her voice easy. "I'm doing informal onboarding conversations with staff across all tenure levels. Do you have 10 minutes? The conversation lasted 42. Camille was careful for the first 30 of them. Measured answers, nothing actionable. The practiced evasion of an agent who had learned that the wrong sentence, said to the wrong person, had a way of appearing in a performance review in a form she would not recognize. She had seen it happen. She had watched it happen to someone she respected. In the 31st minute, Morgan said a name. One of the 6. She said it the way you say a name, when you want someone to understand that you already know what happened, and that you are not going to pretend otherwise. Camille went completely still. She looked at Morgan for a long moment, reading her the way a person reads someone after they have been burned enough times to know the difference between sincerity and performance. "She was the one who told me to document everything," Camille said. Her voice was very quiet. She said, "Write it down the same day. Date it, time it. Keep a copy somewhere nobody in this building can reach." She said, "One day someone will come asking, and you need to be ready to answer." A beat. She left anyway. But I kept writing. Morgan said nothing. She let the silence do its work. "I have 2 years of contemporaneous records," Camille continued. "Not second-hand. Things I personally witnessed. Conversations I documented within 24 hours. Incidents I can place a date and time on." Her jaw tightened. "I have been sitting on all of it, because there was nobody in this building I trusted enough to hand it to. I want you to consider giving a formal statement," Morgan said. "When you're ready, on your terms." Camille looked at her with the direct, unguarded honesty of a woman who had been surviving by being careful and was considering the cost of setting the carefulness down. "What does it cost?" she said. "Something," Morgan said. "I won't tell you it doesn't cost something." Camille was quiet. For a long time, the records room hummed its fluorescent hum around them. "Okay," she said finally. She said it the way you step off the edge of something when you have decided that staying on the ledge is worse than the falling. The story hit online at 6:15. Denver Bureau Office under scrutiny, as new SAC's controversial arrival sparks internal tensions, ran the headline in the Times Colorado Tribune. Is digital edition, the subheading read. Sources question whether recent appointment reflects merit or political calculation. Morgan read it twice in her car. Coffee in the cup holder. The early radio talking about interstate traffic she wasn't in yet. The story was careful, surgical. No names beyond hers. No specifics traceable to any single source. Multiple anonymous voices, all described as veteran officers of the field office, characterizing the morning briefing incident as a misunderstanding that was handled in an unnecessarily aggressive manner by the incoming SAC. One source, identified only as a 20-year veteran of the Denver office, was quoted as stating, "We welcome oversight and accountability. We just want to be led by someone who understands what it means to work real cases under real pressure." She did not need to identify the source. The language told her everything. She called James. "It's up," she said. "I've seen it." His voice had that compressed, controlled quality. The tone of a man managing serious anger in a professional register. "How do you want to handle it?" "We don't respond directly," she said. "The moment we do, we're on their timetable, playing their game on their terms. I won't do that." "Morgan, I've already had a call from the Deputy Director's office this morning." "What did you tell them?" "That I have full confidence in SAC Price, and that the Bureau will be conducting its own review of the relevant events." A pause, "which is both true and which I intend to pursue with complete seriousness." "Good." She looked through her windshield at the building across the street, catching the early light on its glass face. "Let them think the leak worked. Let them think something shook loose. 48 hours. James exhaled slowly. 48 hours, he said. "I'm holding you to it." She put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. Frank Kell arrived at 9:30. Union representative, early 50s, well-dressed in the way of a man who wanted to appear reasonable while ensuring his hourly rate was never questioned. He set up in the second-floor conference room and sent word through Benner, not through Morgan's office directly. She noted carefully that he was available at her convenience. She made him wait 25 minutes. Her bureau-appointed attorney, Sandra Cho, precise, unflappable, always 3 steps ahead of the negotiation she was walking into, was already seated when Morgan arrived. Kell had a thin folder, an expression of practiced professional regret, and the comfortable posture of a man who had sat in rooms like this one many times and had almost always walked out with what he came for. He presented Benner's formal complaint with the careful neutrality of a man reading a weather forecast. SAC Price had created a hostile briefing environment. Her behavior had constituted a public humiliation of a 20-year supervisory agent. The union intended to pursue the matter fully. When he finished, he folded his hands and leaned forward, his voice dropping to the register of a man offering a private kindness. "I want to be straightforward with you, SAC Price, because I believe that serves everyone better." He paused. The pause of a man who had rehearsed the pause. "This complaint has substantial legs. The union has both the documentation and the institutional support to pursue it all the way up the chain." Another pause. "However, these situations don't always have to become formal proceedings. There are paths, quieter paths, that protect everyone's interests and keep this out of the national press." He met her eyes. If the Bureau were open to a mutual acknowledgement, a recognition that first-week tensions ran high on all sides, no formal disciplinary action against any individual, a genuine fresh start, I believe we could find a resolution that serves this office well. He spread his hands. "Nobody wants a protracted fight here." The room was quiet. Sandra Cho made a small, precise note on her legal pad. Morgan looked at Kell for a long moment. At the folder, at the folded hands and the practiced, reasonable expression and the complete, well-oiled machinery of a man who had made this exact offer, in this exact tone, more times than either of them could count, and had almost always received what he was asking for. "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Kell," she said. He nodded, beginning to settle. "My answer is no." Something behind his eyes recalibrated. One careful, almost invisible click. "I see," he said. "Sandra will be your point of contact going forward." She stood. She buttoned her jacket. She walked out of the conference room without looking back. In the hallway, Patricia Vance was at her desk, eyes on her screen, expression professionally neutral. As Morgan passed, Patricia slid a new folder to the edge of her desk without looking up. Morgan picked it up without breaking stride. She had work to do. The camera maintenance request had been filed on a Thursday. Morgan had been appointed on a Friday. She had started on a Monday. She sat with that sequence for a full minute before she wrote it down. Patricia had brought her the original submission form. Clean, precise, undoctored. The request had been submitted to the building's facilities office at 3:47 p.m. On the Thursday before Morgan's appointment was publicly announced anywhere outside a closed DOJ briefing room. Filed 2 days before her name appeared in a single document accessible to anyone at the Denver field office. The signature at the bottom of the original form belonged to Supervisory Special Agent Derek Cross, Camera 7. The camera that covered the hallway directly outside his office. The camera that would have recorded every conversation, every passing exchange, every body language detail of every interaction in that corridor for 18 months. Requested for maintenance. Rendered non-operational. Kept that way. He had not broken the camera because it had stopped working. He had arranged for it to stop working because someone was coming, and he had known enough about who was coming to understand that he needed that hallway to be dark before she arrived. She looked at the submission date on the original form for a long time. Then she turned to a fresh page on her legal pad. At the top she wrote one word. She underlined it twice, pressed down hard enough to leave an impression on the page below. She found Diane Calloway through a 3-year-old Bureau Internal Commendation Bulletin archived in the Federal Intranet's document repository. A notice and a photograph. A woman in a dark blazer holding a plaque, smiling with the specific, earned satisfaction of someone who has done something real and knows it. 8 months after the photograph was taken, Diane Calloway had resigned. Morgan called the number Patricia had found. Diane answered on the second ring. Her voice was carefully guarded in the particular way of someone who had learned to be guarded, but had not fully stopped, hoping that a call might be worth receiving. "I heard they'd appointed someone new," she said, after Morgan identified herself. "A beat. I didn't know it was going to be you. I'd like to meet. Off the record. Not at the federal building." A pause, shorter than Morgan had expected. "There's a coffee place on Blake Street I like," Diane said. "I can be there at 1. She was already seated when Morgan arrived, 37 years old. Charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, the composed bearing of a woman who had been knocked down by something specific and had rebuilt herself with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who intended to never be knocked down the same way twice. She worked as a compliance consultant now, banking sector. She talked about her work for 90 seconds and then looked at Morgan directly. "You're not here to hear about my job," she said. "No," Morgan said, "I'm not." She told Diane what she had found in the files. Not everything. Enough. The 6 names, the pattern, the shape of the machine. Diane listened without interrupting. Her face didn't shift much, but something moved behind her eyes through a careful sequence. Recognition, then the cold, still satisfaction of vindication, arriving years after you needed it. "He was always careful," Diane said when Morgan finished. Her hands were wrapped around her coffee cup, both of them. Cross never did the visible things himself. He set the conditions and let Benner or Stour carry the action. Nothing you could point to with a direct line. She paused. "My first month in Denver, my case files started disappearing from the shared drive. Not deleted. Moved. I'd get called to interviews and arrive to find the interview had been reassigned 20 minutes before I got there." Her jaw tightened. Small things. Nothing you could put in a complaint without sounding like a person who couldn't handle the pressure. But it got bigger. "I flagged an evidence discrepancy in a narcotics case." Not a clerical mistake. A deliberate alteration, documented and time-stamped. She almost laughed. Almost. 3 days later, Kell showed up with a union complaint. Conduct unbecoming. Circumventing supervisory authority. Failure to follow chain of command. She looked at the table. I fought it. For 4 months. I held on. Until holding on cost more than I had left. Then I signed the resignation agreement and walked out of that building for the last time. Her voice was flat and clear, stripped of sentiment but not of weight. They told me the complaint would be sealed if I stayed quiet. A beat. I didn't stay quiet. I just didn't know who to talk to. She reached into her bag and produced a legal-size envelope. Heavy. She set it on the table between them. I kept everything, she said. Every email. Every internal communication. Every document I was ever handed in that building. Evidence alteration. Documentation. Contemporaneous notes from 14 separate incidents, written within 48 hours of each one. Affidavits from 2 other agents who left that precinct under similar circumstances. She pushed the envelope across the table. I've had this in my filing cabinet for 4 years, waiting for someone worth giving it to. Morgan looked at the envelope. She felt the weight of it before she picked it up. 4 years of a person's professional integrity preserved in the dark against the chance that someone worth trusting with it would eventually arrive. She picked it up. I'm going to need you to testify, she said. Formally. When the time comes? Diane looked out the window at the ordinary Blake Street afternoon moving past. People with nowhere complicated to be. The city doing what it always did. Is it going to matter? She said. Not bitterly. The genuine question of a woman who had been promised things before and had learned to ask the question plainly. Yes, Morgan said. It is going to matter. Diane studied her for a long moment, running the particular, hard-earned measurement of a person who knows what it sounds like when someone means what they say. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. Then yes, she said. When the time comes. Morgan drove back through the early afternoon, the envelope on the passenger seat beside her. She kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on top of it. 4 years of a person's truth inside it. 4 years of a box under a bed, waiting. She thought about 6 names in a column. She pulled into the Federal Building parking lot and sat for a moment. Then she picked up the envelope, got out of the car, and went back inside. She had work to do. James made the call at 8. He called Morgan at 8:22 to tell her what had been set in motion. Raymond Cole, DOJ Civil Rights Division, he said. He's been building a passive file on Denver since 2020. An anonymous complaint was filed that year, and subsequently went cold when the agent withdrew. He always believed that withdrawal was coerced. A pause. Your documentation activates the 2020 complaint and adds 5 years of additional pattern evidence. Morgan, this has cleared the threshold for a federal civil rights investigation. Cole is opening a formal inquiry effective today. She set her pen down. The union complaint against you, he continued, is placed on administrative hold pending the federal inquiry. Kell's attorneys have already been notified. I understand from the right people that the union is presently reassessing its position regarding Benner. Morgan sat quietly with that for a moment. She allowed herself to feel it. The real, physical sensation of a situation that has been grinding against you, beginning to turn the other way. 14 years of the force had taught her exactly what momentum felt like when it shifted. She allowed herself to feel it for 30 seconds. Then she picked her pen back up. Morgan. James's voice was different now, quieter. The voice of a man who was no longer managing a crisis but checking on a person. How are you doing, actually? She considered the question the way she rarely permitted herself to, not the professional reflex answer times fine, focused, moving forward times the one she had been giving for 14 years because it was easier than the real one and it kept things moving. Tonight it was James, and James would know the difference. I'm tired, she said. But I'm good. And because it was him, almost there. Almost, he agreed quietly. She hung up. She looked at her legal pad. 6 names in a column. Cross's name underlined at the top. She picked up the pen. She turned to the next page. She started building the sequence. He was standing outside her office door at 7:54, and he looked like a man who had spent the night arguing with himself and conclusively lost. Rick Stour, 44 years old, Cross's field operations supervisor, 12 years in the Denver office. His personnel file described him as Times professional, reliable, consistently mid-tier. His case record was solid. He was not a cruel man. He had never been the one pouring the coffee, filing the manufactured complaints, or making the calls to union attorneys. He had simply been the one who had stood in proximity to all of it for a very long time and perfected the art of not fully seeing what was directly in front of him, which was precisely what had made him so useful. He knocked once. She said, "Come in." He sat down across from her desk, with his hands clasped in his lap, leaning slightly forward, the posture of a man in a waiting room who has brought the difficult news himself and is bracing himself to put it down. She waited. She had learned a long time ago that people who needed to say hard things required space to say them. Rush them, and they retreated back behind whatever they had built to keep the hard thing inside. Give them silence, and most of them would fill it. Stour filled it. "Cross called me last night," he said. His voice was steady. "Around 10. He wasn't asking. He was informing me." He looked at his hands. He said to stay consistent in whatever I said to the OPR. Those were his exact words. Stay consistent. He reminded me that we'd been through a lot together over 12 years. That people who understood how things worked in this office tended to come out fine. His jaw worked once, and people who didn't tend not to. "That is a threat," Morgan said. "Yes," Stour said, simply, directly, no qualification. "It is." He was quiet for a moment. She let the quiet breathe. "I've been in this office for 12 years, he said finally. "I have watched things happen in this building that I looked away from. Not because I believed they were right, because the price of not looking away seemed—" He stopped. Started again. "I told myself I wasn't the one doing it. I was just close to it. That there's a difference." He exhaled. "There isn't. I know there isn't. I've known for a long time." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document. He leaned forward and placed it on the desk in front of her. "That is a written account of every incident I personally witnessed going back 4 years. Every manufactured performance improvement plan I was told to validate. Every conversation I had with Cross about these cases that I documented within 48 hours of having it. Every instruction I received from him that I understood to be about keeping specific agents destabilized." His voice was clear and steady. "No performance in it. No plea. I'll give truthful testimony at the hearing. All of it. Whatever that costs me, I'll pay it." Morgan looked at the document on her desk. She did not pick it up yet. "What changed?" she said. Not as an accusation. Genuinely. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was complicated and private, the expression of a person opening a door they normally kept locked. "My daughter," he said. "She's been in the process of applying to the Bureau for 8 months, made the final round." He paused. "She called me Sunday. She was excited, said her potential first posting would have a good sack, said she felt like she'd be okay." He stopped. His voice had gone quieter. "And I was sitting in my kitchen at 10 at night with Cross on the line telling me to stay consistent, and I thought about her walking into a building like this one. I thought about 6 names in files I have seen and looked away from." He looked directly at Morgan. "I have been not seeing things for 12 years, and I have a daughter who just decided she wants to wear this badge." The office was very still. Morgan thought about 6 names in a column, about Diane Calloway and a 4-year envelope, about Camille Osei in a file room, alone, writing everything down the way someone had taught her before that person was run out of the building. She thought about every version of Rick Stour she had ever encountered in every building she had ever worked in. The men who were not the perpetrators, but who had built the machine's foundation with their silence, year after year after year, calculating the cost of the right thing and finding it too high, until a phone call at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night finally changed the arithmetic. She didn't offer him absolution. It was not hers to give. The 6 names in her column had not put her here to forgive the men who had watched. But a man who arrives late at the right choice has still arrived. "I need you in that hearing room," she said. "Truthful testimony. Everything you saw, everything you knew, everything Cross told you to stay consistent about." She held his gaze steadily. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "No hesitation at all." "Then be in that room. That's what I need from you." He stood. He straightened his jacket with the careful, small, physical precision of a man holding himself together through the discipline of gesture. He walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "I'm sorry," he said, without turning around. "For 12 years of it." Morgan looked at the back of his head, the graying hair, the tired set of his shoulders. "Be in that room," she said. "That's worth something." He left. She sat alone for a moment with the building humming around her. Phones and footsteps and dispatch radio and the ordinary sounds of a federal office conducting its work. Then she picked up Stour's document, placed it in the folder, opened the next page of her legal pad, and kept working. She worked until 11:45 that night. She drove to her apartment. She stood over the kitchen sink eating rice from a cold container. She was back at her desk by 5 in the morning. She had work to do. Number, day 7. 5:04 a.m. James answered on the first ring. "I'm ready," Morgan said. She walked him through all 3 fronts. Every move, every timing, every dependency. He listened without interrupting until she finished, and then there was the brief, specific silence of a man locking something into permanent place. "Raymond Cole has been waiting on documentation of this caliber for 5 years, James said. "What you're giving him doesn't just activate the prior complaint, it builds a 6-year federal civil rights case, Morgan. This is not an internal disciplinary matter anymore. This is a federal investigation." "I know. Cole will need the full package by 9. Calloway, is she still?" "She'll testify," Morgan said. "She has been waiting 4 years for an official room that would actually hear her." "Okay." A pause. "I'll call Cole at 8. You'll hear from him by 9:15. "Thank you, Harold." "Don't thank me yet," he said, for the second time since this had started. "Thank me when it's done." The DOJ letter of formal inquiry arrived at Frank Kell's office at 4:22 in the afternoon. At 4:31, Morgan's phone rang. Sandra Cho. Her voice had the very precise, carefully controlled quality of a woman maintaining professional composure over something that wanted to be considerably louder. "Kell called me," she said. "He wants to know if we're open to a conversation." Morgan looked out her window at the Denver skyline, at the city conducting its ordinary late afternoon business. "Tell him we'll see him at the hearing," she said. She hung up. She looked at her legal pad. She drew a single clean line through each item in the 3-front sequence she had built over 7 days. Then she turned to a fresh page, wrote the date at the top, and kept going. She had work to do. The OPR hearing was on the 8th floor of the federal building, in a room with a wall of south-facing windows that let in flat morning light and a rectangular table that ran the full length of it. Morgan arrived 40 minutes before the scheduled start time. She wanted to see the room empty. She wanted to understand its dimensions and choose her seat before anyone else could make that choice for her or observe her making it. She set her files on the department's table, clean stacks, tabbed and indexed, every document in the precise order she would need it. Nothing improvised, nothing left to chance. Then she stood at the window and looked at the city. Patricia Vance arrived at 8:22 with a 3-inch navy blue binder, labeled in clean block letters, and placed it beside Morgan's files without a word. She sat down, folded her hands. 19 years of documentation brought into the light of a room that was finally prepared to receive it. Sandra Cho arrived at 8:28. They exchanged a look, the look of 2 people who had been carrying something heavy together and could feel the ground beginning to level. Diane Calloway came in at 8:35. Dark blazer, hair pinned back, composed with the deliberate composure of a woman who had decided before walking through the door exactly how she was going to hold herself in this room and was holding it. She found Morgan's eyes from across the space and held them for a moment. Morgan gave her the smallest nod. Diane sat in the gallery. She placed her bag on the floor, folded her hands in her lap, and fixed her gaze on the wall in front of her. Camille Osei entered quietly at 8:40 and sat beside Patricia. Her hands were still today. 3 weeks ago, they would not have been. Stour came in at 8:45. He paused in the doorway for exactly 1 second, long enough to see which side of the room Morgan was on, and then walked across the floor and sat behind her. Neither of them spoke. Cross and Benner arrived at 8:55 with their union attorney, Garrett Alcott, a tall and silver-haired man who carried his briefcase with the comfortable ease of someone accustomed to winning. They moved to their table with the coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed their entrance, but something had changed since the briefing on day one. The movement was coordinated, but the ease underneath it was not genuine anymore. It was performed. It was the performance of ease, by people who no longer felt it. Cross scanned the room. Force of habit. The inventory check of a man who had walked into spaces like he owned them for 22 years. His eyes crossed the gallery and found Diane Calloway. Something happened in his face. Fast, involuntary, controlled before it could fully form. But she had been watching for it, and she caught it. The slight contraction, the almost imperceptible recalibration of a man who had anticipated a different room. His eyes moved to Stour. His jaw went rigid for a moment. Then he looked away, settled into his chair, and leaned toward Alcott in rapid, tight conversation. Alcott answered with the careful, professional nod of a man doing live arithmetic on resources that were changing in real time. The three-member OPR panel entered at 9 exactly. Panel chair Loretta Graves, retired federal judge, 66, with the patient, immovable calm of a woman who had presided over difficult rooms for 4 decades and had stopped finding any of them surprising, took the center seat. 2 assessors flanked her, notebooks open. At the end of the panel table sat Raymond Cole, DOJ Civil Rights Division. He had been there, Morgan realized, before she arrived. He introduced himself briefly and precisely. The findings of this hearing would be incorporated into a federal civil rights review of the Denver FBI field office covering a 6-year period. All testimony was subject to federal perjury statutes. He returned to his notes. The room temperature dropped several degrees. Alcott shifted in his seat. Sandra Cho presented the department's case with the clean, methodical momentum of a process that had been built from solid ground. No flourish, no drama, just documentation, arranged in the order of its devastation. The 6-agent pattern. Every name, every year, every manufactured PIP, every union countercomplaint, every press disclosure, every sealed record. Patricia's 19-year binder laid it out with the comprehensive clarity of someone who had watched an institution betray itself and written every betrayal down. The camera sabotage, the original maintenance request, Cross's signature. The timestamp showing it had been filed before Morgan's appointment was publicly known. Premeditation. Documented. Signed. Permanent. Camille Osei's testimony. 2 years of contemporaneous first-hand accounts. Specific dates and specific language. Delivered without flinching and without embellishment. It landed in the room with the weight of something that has been waiting to be said aloud in a room with the authority to receive it. Stour's written account. 12 years of proximity to the machine. The manufactured reviews he had validated. The complaints he had been directed to corroborate. The phone call at 10 o'clock, instructing him to stay consistent. Diane Calloway's deposition was last. Sandra read it aloud, clearly, and without editorializing. The room listened to a woman describe in her own precise language what had been done to her, what it had cost her, and what it had felt like to carry it for 4 years before someone gave her a reason to put it down. The evidence alteration she had reported. The complaint that had been converted into a weapon against her. The resignation agreement signed in a room with 2 men who told her it would protect her record and said nothing about what it would actually cost. The gallery was completely silent. Morgan did not look at Cross. She had decided, somewhere in the hours before the hearing, that she would not spend this morning watching Derek Cross. She had spent enough of the past 8 days watching him. She watched Loretta Graves. She watched the judge read. Not the performance of a person reading for an audience, the actual work of a mind, assembling a complete picture, one document at a time. Patient, thorough, building understanding with the methodical care of someone who understood that the weight of what she was holding required complete attention. That was enough. That was everything. Alcott requested a recess at 11:15. Graves granted 12 minutes. Cross, Benner, and Alcott moved to the corner of the room. Morgan watched from her peripheral vision. She saw the specific moment Benner's posture changed, the slight collapse of his shoulders, the way he looked at the floor, the small, definitive nod at something Alcott said with the nod of a man who has done the math and arrived at an answer he doesn't like. At 11:36, Alcott approached Sandra Cho. 4 minutes of quiet conversation. Sandra came back to the table and sat close to Morgan. "Benner wants to negotiate," she said. "Resignation with cooperative statement. No criminal referral on the harassment charge, in exchange for full cooperation on the evidence room irregularities." A beat. Alcott read the room. Certification terms? Permanent ban. No law enforcement position in any state, in any capacity, permanently. Morgan looked at the table in front of her. At the clean tabbed files they had built from nothing but the truth and the patience of people who had kept the truth alive in filing cabinets and envelopes and annotated binders for years while waiting for a room that could actually use it. "Accept it," she said. The panel reconvened at 11:43. Benner's resignation was entered into the record. His permanent certification ban was noted. He stood and walked out of the room without looking at anyone. Cross sat alone at the union table. Alcott was still beside him, but the quality of his presence had changed. The subtle repositioning of an attorney, doing the recalculation of remaining resources in real time. Cross stared straight ahead, hands flat on the table, jaw set. He was going to fight. She had known he would. Some people fight all the way to the end, not because they believe they can win, but because yielding is the one thing their identity cannot absorb. Loretta Graves looked at him across the room with the patient, completely untroubled expression of a woman who had seen this posture before and was not impressed by it. "Supervisory Special Agent Cross," she said. "You may respond to the presentation." Cross stood. He spoke for 24 minutes. He invoked 22 years of service. He challenged the pattern documentation as retrospective and agenda-driven. He attacked Stour's credibility. He dismissed Diane Calloway as unverifiable. He called Camille Osei a junior agent with a personal grievance. He performed, with considerable skill, the role of a man who has been profoundly wronged. Graves let him finish without interrupting once. She sat with her hands folded and her eyes on him, and let every word he said land in the record exactly where he intended it to land. Then she opened her folder. The room went so quiet that the climate control above the ceiling tiles became audible. Loretta Graves read without looking up, without pausing for effect, without any indication that the words in front of her were anything other than exactly what they were: documented truth, arranged into the precise language of consequence. In the matter of the pattern documentation submitted for this review, this panel finds the following. Between the years 2019 and 2024, 6 agents assigned to the Denver FBI field office departed, under circumstances that, examined collectively, constitute a demonstrable pattern of targeted attrition. These departures were disproportionately concentrated among female agents and agents of color. In each case, the departure was preceded by a period of documented professional harassment, a union counter-complaint filed in response to any grievance raised by the departing agent, and in 4 of 6 cases, the strategic disclosure of unverified conduct allegations to regional press contacts. She turned a page. The panel further finds that the briefing incident of day 1 in which a 22-year supervisory agent publicly subjected his incoming commanding officer to professional dismissal and mockery in the presence of 41 subordinates, was not an isolated act of poor judgment. It was the most recent expression of a behavioral pattern cultivated over years under the complete absence of institutional consequence. Alcott's pen was moving quickly on his pad. Too quickly for a man receiving good news. The panel finds that surveillance, camera 7, serving the hallway adjacent to the supervisory agent's office, was rendered non-operational by a maintenance request submitted by Supervisory Special Agent Derek Cross 3 days prior to SAC Price's first day, and 2 days before SAC Price's appointment was disclosed outside a closed DOJ briefing room. Graves looked up from the page for the first time. She looked directly across the room at Cross. Her voice did not change. This panel finds that this constitutes premeditated obstruction of evidence and deliberate interference with the command authority of an incoming superior officer. This was not negligence. This was preparation. Cross stared back at her. His jaw was a hard line. His hands were flat and motionless on the table. He was still holding the posture, still performing the man who would not yield. The performance was running on fumes now, consuming itself for lack of anything real left underneath it. Graves looked back down. This panel notes the written deposition of former agent Diane Calloway, reviewed in full. Her account is specific, contemporaneously documented, corroborated by independent witness testimony, and credible in every dimension this panel is equipped to assess. The panel further notes that an anonymous contact was made to her employer during her final period of active employment in this office, suggesting that her voluntary resignation was induced through professional coercion. This panel characterizes that contact as retaliatory witness intimidation and refers it for criminal review. In the gallery, Diane Calloway sat completely still. Her hands were open and flat in her lap. The stillness of a person who has been carrying something for 4 years and is feeling it, for the first time, in an official room, being acknowledged and put down by someone with the authority to do so. Graves set the first document aside and lifted a second page. This panel's determination regarding Supervisory Special Agent Derek Cross. Alcott put his pen down. This panel finds that Supervisory Special Agent Cross engaged in a sustained and deliberate pattern of targeted professional harassment, systematic abuse of supervisory authority, premeditated obstruction of evidence, coordinated interference with the command authority of a superior officer, and the willful construction of a hostile professional environment that caused demonstrable, measurable harm to not fewer than 6 agents over a period of not less than 5 years. The panel's recommendation is as follows. Termination from the Federal Bureau of Investigation with cause, effective immediately. Forfeiture of federal pension benefits, subject to formal review proceedings. Referral of the premeditated evidence obstruction charge to the United States Attorney's Office for criminal review. Referral of the evidence room irregularities, documented and corroborated through multiple independent sources, to federal authority in coordination with the active DOJ civil rights inquiry. This panel further recommends a comprehensive audit of all union complaints filed at the Denver field office over the preceding 6 years, with specific attention to matters involving the departure of female agents and agents of color. Graves placed both documents on top of each other, folded her hands. This hearing is concluded. The sound that followed was not loud. It was the sound of a room exhaling, chair legs on the floor, papers being gathered. The small, unremarkable sounds of people coming back to themselves after something significant has passed through the space they were standing in. Cross stood. Alcott said something to him, urgent and quiet, the practiced language of damage management and next steps. Cross was not listening. His face had gone gray beneath the controlled expression, the performance finally, completely out of fuel. He stood for a moment with the particular stillness of a man who has believed in his own untouchability for so long that the actual fact of this moment has no framework inside him to land in. He looked across the room at Morgan. She looked back at him. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Not with satisfaction, not with anger, not with the relief of a person who has finally made it to the other side of something that tried to break them. With the same even, unhurried calm she had been carrying since 7:19 in the morning on day one, when she had sat in a parking garage with lukewarm coffee in both hands and watched his building before it had the chance to watch her back. She looked away first, by choice, because she was done with him. She looked at Patricia Vance instead. Patricia was sitting with her 3-inch binder closed in front of her, both hands resting flat on top of it, and she was crying without embarrassment or apology. The quiet, undefended tears of a woman setting down a weight she has been carrying for 19 years and feeling the absence of it for the first time. Every page in that binder, every date, every name, every year of watching and writing and filing in the careful hope that it would one day reach someone with the standing to act on it. It had reached her. It had mattered. Sandra Cho touched Morgan's arm lightly. "It's done," she said. Morgan nodded once. She looked at Camille Osei, jaw set, eyes very bright, holding herself together with the precise discipline of a young agent who was still on duty and knew it, and was not going to let this room see her come undone. Not here, not yet, but she was going to let herself feel it later, somewhere private. And it was going to be real, and it was going to be deserved. She looked at Stour. He was looking at the table in front of him, not celebrating, not relieved, sitting with the weight of a man who has finally arrived at the right side of something and is honest enough with himself to know the arrival came 12 years too late for 6 people who deserved better. She looked at Diane Calloway. Diane had her eyes closed for just a moment. Her face turned toward the south-facing windows, toward the light, the expression of a person standing in warmth after a very long time in the cold. Then she opened her eyes and found Morgan across the room. Neither of them smiled. There was nothing simple enough to smile at. What had been produced in this room was not a triumph. It was an accounting, and accountings, no matter how necessary and how long overdue, are not celebrations. 6 people had been driven out of work they loved and were good at. Years had been taken from them. Careers had been bent or broken. The machine had run for a long time, and what this hearing had produced was a reckoning, not a restoration. But they looked at each other, the two of them, across the width of that hearing room, and what passed between them was something that did not require a name. The recognition of 2 women who had walked through the same building's damage by different roads and had come out on the same side of it. James caught her eye from the gallery. He gave her the smallest nod, the same nod he had given her in the briefing room on day 1, from across a room that had not yet understood who it was looking at. She nodded back. She was the last one to leave. Everyone else filtered out the panel, the observers, Sandra, Patricia, Camille, Stour, Diane, and finally Cross, who walked out without looking back, with Alcott's urgent, professional voice following close behind him into the corridor. Morgan sat alone in the hearing room for 3 minutes. She looked at the south-facing windows, at the afternoon light falling through them in long, flat angles across the rectangular table. She looked at her files, every tab in its place, every document, exactly where she had put it. Nothing improvised. Nothing built on anything but documentation and patience and the preserved truth of people who had refused to let what had been done to them simply disappear. She thought about 6 names in a column. She thought about a parking garage at 7 in the morning and a lukewarm cup of coffee. She stood up. She buttoned her jacket. She gathered her files in one clean motion and walked to the door. She did not look back. She had work to do. She pulled into the parking lot of the Federal Building at 7:49. The same day of the week, she had first pulled into the garage across the street and watched from a distance, deciding who she was going to be when she walked through the door. She turned off the engine. She sat in the quiet for a moment, not to prepare herself, not because she needed to collect or settle anything, because it was a clear Tuesday in early autumn, and the light was good, and she had learned over 14 years, and especially over the last 3 weeks, to receive the quiet when it came and not rush past it. She picked up her bag and got out of the car. The lobby was the same as it had always been. Same security desk, same recycled air, same federal hum. The desk officer looked up when she came through the door and came to attention. "Good morning, Sack Price." "Good morning," she said, and kept moving. The changes were not dramatic. She had not wanted dramatic. Dramatic was loud and performative, and the first thing that eroded when the attention moved on. She had wanted structural, the kind of change that embedded itself into the daily operation of a building and held after every headline had moved on to something else. New complaint intake process. All formal complaints now logged through Patricia's office. Mandatory timestamp, copy filed directly with OPR. No more documents migrating into backlogs. No more maintenance requests filed strategically under cover of institutional friction. Every document, every date, every signature, visible and permanent and immovable. Agent wellness consultations. Voluntary, confidential. Routed through an external provider with no internal reporting chain. Camille had proposed it. Morgan had approved it in 48 hours. A 6-year audit of all union complaints, being conducted jointly by Sandra Cho's office and a DOJ-appointed assessor. Slow work, the kind of work that would never make the front page and would matter more than anything that did. She stopped at Patricia's desk on the way upstairs. Patricia was already at her keyboard, reading glasses on, coffee beside her monitor. She looked up when Morgan approached, and her expression was different from the one she had been wearing on day one. No longer the careful professional neutrality of a woman waiting to see if this new person was worth trusting. Something more open, more present. The expression of a person who had set something heavy down and was discovering how much more freely she could move without it. "Morning, Miss Vance." "Morning, Sack Price." Patricia reached to the edge of the desk. "A letter came for you yesterday afternoon. Hand-delivered." She produced a small white envelope. Morgan took it. Her own name on the front. In handwriting she recognized. She put it in her jacket pocket and headed upstairs. Camille was in the corridor outside the operations room with a case file under her arm, heading toward the Field Coordination Center. She stopped when she saw Morgan. She straightened, not the reflex straightening of a junior agent in the presence of rank, but the particular straightening of a person who is proud of where they are standing and knows it. "Task Force coordination meeting is Friday," Camille said. "The new assignment. A federal organized crime task force, 2-week integration." "I've been going through the background files." "I know," Morgan said. "I signed your transfer request yesterday." Camille started to move past. Then she stopped. She turned and looked at Morgan with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone who has decided that saying the thing is better than not saying it. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." Morgan looked at her, at the 3rd-year patch, at the steady hands. "You did the hard part," she said. "You stayed when staying cost something, and you told the truth when telling the truth cost more. The rest was paperwork." Camille almost smiled. Then she did, briefly, completely, without any of the careful containment she had worn like armor for 3 years, and she turned and walked down the corridor with the particular step of someone who has stopped bracing themselves against what is coming next. Morgan watched her go. Then she went upstairs, her office. The same small room with the south-facing window. The same desk. The same view of the city. The plant on the windowsill was not dying anymore. 3 weeks of consistent watering had done something small and improbable to it. New growth at the top, green and slightly ridiculous against the morning sky. She had not replaced it with anything newer or better. She had just kept watering it every morning, as though it mattered. She sat down at her desk. She opened her jacket pocket and took out the envelope. She opened it. Inside, a single folded page. SAC Price. I looked back at my files last week for an entirely different reason. A reference letter I needed to locate. I found everything else instead. 4 years of documents I had almost stopped knowing I still had. I took them out and I read them again. All of them. And this time, it was different. Before, reading them felt like evidence that something had been done to me that no one in any official room would ever say out loud. This time, they felt like a record that had been received. I don't know the exact word for the difference between those two things, but it is the difference between carrying something and having put it down. I'm not coming back to the bureau. That chapter is closed and I have made my peace with it. I built something after Denver, and I intend to keep building it. But I want you to know what you gave me, not just the hearing, not just the formal acknowledgement, though that mattered more than I will probably ever be fully able to say. What you gave me is this: the knowledge that the documentation existed for a reason, that someone had been keeping it for 19 years because it was worth keeping, that someone walked into that building knowing exactly what had been done there and refused to let it keep being done. I put the box back in the filing cabinet. But now it feels like an archive, not a wound. That is because of you. And because of what you chose to be when you had every reason to be something easier. Thank you for being the kind of person worth trusting with the truth. Diane Calloway. Morgan folded the letter. She held it in both hands for a moment. She looked out the window at the parking lot below. At the federal building entrance, where the bureau sign was visible from this angle. All letters intact, all of them lit. Pale and steady in the morning. She thought about a 4-year-old envelope passed across a table in a coffee shop on Blake Street. About 19 years of documentation, kept one page at a time by a woman 17 feet from the engine of a machine, writing it down in the dark, because she had decided that what she witnessed mattered even when no one in authority was willing to say so. She thought about 6 names in a column. She thought Ejuder, Genserderdode, and a gold shield, placed quietly on a table, and 41 people who suddenly understood what kind of morning it had become. She placed the letter in the top drawer of her desk. She closed the drawer. She opened the first case file of the morning. Outside her window, the parking lot was filling up. Agents arriving for the day shift, moving across the asphalt in 1s and 2s in the clean autumn light. Some of them still hadn't fully decided what to make of her. Some of them probably wouldn't for a while yet. That was fine. She did not need their certainty. She needed their professionalism, their compliance with a code of conduct that was now being actively enforced by someone who had read every file in this building and intended to keep reading. The rest would come with time, or it wouldn't, and she would handle that too. She turned a page. She picked up her pen. The morning light moved across her desk in long, even angles, and the building hummed around her phones and footsteps and dispatch radio and the ordinary, irreplaceable sounds of a federal office at work. Her office, her people, her building to protect and rebuild. One document, one day, one page at a time. She kept her eyes on the file. She kept her pen moving. She had work to do. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe right now. Because the next story is one you will not be able to stop thinking about.